The maintenance request came through on a Tuesday morning, and I wish I had called in sick instead. My supervisor, Janet Kurt, handed me the work order with an expression I had never seen before. She looked nervous, maybe even scared. In 20 years of managing Vatican maintenance staff, Janet had seen everything from flooded basements to electrical fires. Nothing rattled her. "Preston, this one's different," she said, not meeting my eyes. The order came directly from the Cardinal's office. No questions, no delays. I pulled my tool bag from the van and checked the work order again. Audio disturbance, sublevel 3, section 12. The Vatican employed me for 15 years, fixing their heating systems, electrical problems, and plumbing issues. I knew every tunnel, every basement, every forgotten corner of this place. But section 12 was new to me. "Janet, I've never worked section 12 before. What kind of audio disturbance are we talking about?" She shrugged, but I could see tension in her shoulders. "The request doesn't specify, just says to report to Dr. Marcus Finley and follow his instructions exactly." Something in her tone made me pause. "Have you heard of this Dr. Finley before?" "No," she said quickly. "But that doesn't mean anything. The Vatican employs hundreds of researchers and academics. They don't all pass through maintenance." The guard at the employee entrance was someone I had never seen before. Tall, pale, wearing the standard dark uniform. He looked at my ID badge for longer than usual. "Preston Holt, maintenance," I said, holding up the work order. He nodded, but didn't speak. Just pointed toward the stairs that led down to the sublevels. I had worked in basements before, but this felt different as I descended. The walls were older stone, not the concrete I was used to. The lighting was dim and yellow, casting everything in a sickly color. My footsteps echoed more than they should have. Sublevel 1 housed storage and archives. Sublevel 2 contained the mechanical systems I maintained regularly. But sublevel 3 was unfamiliar territory. The hallway stretched longer than I expected, with numbered doors on both sides. Most were locked, but I could hear sounds behind some of them. Typing, quiet conversations, normal office noise. Section 12 was at the very end, behind a heavy wooden door that looked centuries old. The brass nameplate read, "Acoustic Research Division," in English and Latin. I knocked, but no one answered. The work order said to report to Dr. Marcus Finley, but the office appeared empty. I tried the handle and found it unlocked. The room was small, about the size of a large closet, with filing cabinets lining 3 walls. A desk sat in the center with papers scattered across its surface. Everything looked normal, except for the fact that I could hear something that made my skin crawl. It sounded like voices, but not quite. Like people talking underwater or through thick glass. The sounds seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I couldn't make out words, but the tone was unmistakable. Pain, suffering, endless, hopeless suffering. "You must be the maintenance guy." I spun around. A man in his 50s stood in the doorway, wearing a simple black suit. His hair was gray, and he had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Dr. Finley?" I asked. "Just call me Marcus. Thanks for coming so quickly." He stepped into the room and closed the door behind him. "I know this is unusual, but we have a very specific problem." "What exactly am I looking at here?" I gestured around the room. The work order just said audio disturbance. Marcus sat behind the desk and pulled out a thick folder. "This room has been used for acoustic research since 1952. We study sound, vibration, resonance, things like that." "Okay," I said, still hearing those terrible voices in the background. "What's the problem?" "The problem is that we're picking up sounds we shouldn't be able to hear." Marcus opened the folder and showed me several pages of technical documents. This room is located directly above a much older chamber. Medieval, possibly earlier. The sound is bleeding through. I looked at the papers, but they were filled with scientific terms I didn't understand. "Bleeding through from where?" Marcus closed the folder. That's where it gets complicated. Preston, how long have you worked here? 15 years. Have you ever heard stories? Rumors about what might be stored in the deeper levels? I had heard stories, of course. Every employee had. Tales of secret archives, forbidden books, artifacts that the church kept hidden from the world. But I never paid much attention to gossip. Some, I admitted. Most of those stories are nonsense, Marcus said. But some aren't. He leaned back in his chair. This building sits on layers of history. Roman ruins, medieval foundations, Renaissance additions. And beneath it all, there are chambers that predate Christianity in Rome. The voices in the background seemed to grow louder as he spoke. I could almost make out individual words now, but they were in languages I didn't recognize. What does that have to do with my maintenance work? I asked. The chamber below us was sealed in 1823, Marcus continued. The official records say it was due to structural concerns, but the unofficial records tell a different story. He pulled out a leather-bound journal and opened it to a page marked with a red ribbon. The writing was an old-fashioned script, hard to read. This is from the personal diary of Cardinal Gregory. He was in charge of the sealing operation. Marcus turned the journal toward me. Read the entry from March 15th. I squinted at the faded ink. The handwriting was difficult, but I could make out most of it. The chamber has been successfully sealed with brick and mortar. Father Baker insisted on additional measures. Salt and iron mixed into the mortar. Blessed water used throughout. I confess I thought such precautions excessive until I heard what emanates from below. The sounds are not of this world. They speak of torments that should not exist, of suffering that has no end. I pray the seal holds, for I fear what might happen if those voices ever reach the surface. I looked up at Marcus. This is from 1823? Yes, and the seal held until about 6 months ago. The voices seemed to pulse now, rising and falling like waves. I could hear individual words in what might have been Latin or possibly something older. The tone was desperate, pleading. 6 months ago, we started picking up audio anomalies in this room, Marcus explained. At first, we thought it was interference from the mechanical systems, but when we investigated, we found that the sounds were coming from below. So fix the seal, I said. Rebrick the chamber. Marcus shook his head. We tried. We sent a team down to assess the damage. They found something disturbing. He pulled out a photograph and handed it to me. It showed a stone chamber with a vaulted ceiling. The walls were covered in what looked like writing, but the symbols were unlike anything I had ever seen. They seemed to move in the photograph, shifting and changing when I wasn't looking directly at them. The seal wasn't broken from our side, Marcus said. It was broken from inside. The voices suddenly stopped. The silence was worse than the sound had been. It felt expectant, like something was listening, waiting. Preston, Marcus said quietly. I need you to go down there. Absolutely not. The Vatican's archives contain knowledge that goes back thousands of years. Some of that knowledge was sealed away for good reason, but some of it might be needed again. I'm a maintenance worker, I said. I fix pipes and replace light bulbs. I don't explore cursed chambers. The church believes that chamber contains a direct acoustic link to hell itself. The words hung in the air between us. I wanted to laugh, to dismiss it as nonsense, but the voices I had been hearing told a different story. That's ridiculous, I said, but my voice sounded weak even to me. Is it? Marcus pulled out another photograph. This one showed the same chamber, but from a different angle. In the center of the room was a circular depression in the floor, like a well. The Romans built this chamber as a temple. Later, early Christians used it for a different purpose. They believed they had found a way to listen to the voices of the damned. Why would anyone want to do that? knowledge, understanding. The church has always sought to understand the nature of good and evil, heaven and hell. This chamber was one of their early experiments in direct communication with the underworld. I set the photograph down on the desk. And you want me to go down there because the voices are getting stronger. They're bleeding through into other parts of the building. Last week, a nun in the archives started speaking in tongues during morning prayers. Yesterday, one of the guards reported hearing screaming coming from the walls themselves. The silence stretched between us. I could feel something pressing against my eardrums, like the air pressure had changed. "What exactly do you need me to do?" I asked. Marcus opened a desk drawer and pulled out a small digital recorder. "Document what you find. Record the voices if possible, and see if there's a way to reinforce the seal from inside." From inside? The chamber has 2 access points. The main entrance was sealed in 1823, but there's a service tunnel that connects to the modern maintenance areas. It was added in the 1960s when they updated the building's infrastructure. He handed me a rolled-up blueprint. I spread it out on the desk and found the chamber marked in red ink. A thin line showed the service tunnel connecting it to a maintenance corridor I knew well. "This tunnel is barely 3 feet wide," I said, studying the blueprint. "It was designed for running cables and pipes, not for people. But you're small enough to fit." I looked at the recorder in my hand. It was a simple device, the kind students might use for lectures. "And what happens if I find something down there?" "Then we'll know what we're dealing with." The voices started again, but they sounded different now. Closer, more distinct. I could hear individual words in English mixed with the foreign languages. "Help us," one voice whispered. "Please," said another. "So cold," came a third. Marcus noticed my expression. "You can hear them clearly now, can't you?" I nodded. The voices weren't just background noise anymore. They were speaking directly to me. "That means the barrier is weakening," Marcus said. "We don't have much time." Time for what? Before whatever is down there finds a way to the surface. I stood up and walked to the door. Every instinct told me to leave, to go home, to pretend this conversation never happened. But the voices followed me, whispering my name now. "Preston," they called. "Preston, help us." I turned back to Marcus. "How do you know my name isn't down there already? How do you know I'm not walking into a trap?" "Because you're still asking questions," he said. "If you were compromised, you would have agreed immediately." That logic seemed sound, but I wasn't convinced. "What about backup? What if something goes wrong? I'll monitor you from here." Marcus tapped a small radio on his desk. "This room has equipment that can track your location in the tunnel system. If you run into trouble, I can guide you back." The voices were getting louder, more insistent. They knew we were talking about them. "Come to us, Preston," they whispered. "We have so much to show you." I looked at the blueprint again, tracing the path from the maintenance corridor to the chamber. It would take about 20 minutes to crawl through the service tunnel, assuming I didn't get stuck. "What happened to the team you sent down before?" I asked. Marcus hesitated. "They came back changed." "Changed how?" They couldn't stop talking about what they had seen. They described things that don't exist, places that shouldn't be possible. 2 of them are in psychiatric care. The third transferred to a monastery in Tibet and took a vow of silence. "And you want me to go down there anyway?" "You're different," Marcus said. "You've worked in this building for 15 years. You're familiar with its rhythms, its sounds. You might be able to distinguish between what's real and what's not." I wasn't sure that made me feel any better, but I understood his point. I knew every pipe, every electrical hum, every settling noise in this building. If something was out of place, I would notice. "How long do I have?" I asked. Marcus checked his watch. The voices are strongest between midnight and 3 a.m. It's almost 11 now. If you go in at midnight, you'll have the best chance of hearing them clearly. And the worst chance of coming back sane? Possibly. I folded up the blueprint and put it in my tool bag along with the recorder. I'm going to need some equipment. What kind of equipment? Flashlight, rope, first aid kit, and a hammer. A hammer? If I need to break something to get out, I want to be prepared. Marcus nodded and made a phone call. 20 minutes later, a different guard arrived with a backpack full of supplies. The man didn't speak, just handed me the bag and left. I spent the next hour studying the blueprint and testing the radio. Marcus walked me through the route twice, pointing out potential obstacles and emergency exits. The plan was simple. Enter through the maintenance corridor, crawl through the service tunnel, document whatever I found in the chamber, and return the same way. What if the tunnel collapses? I asked. It won't. We've had structural engineers check it recently. What if I get lost? Follow the main cable runs. They all lead back to the maintenance areas. What if something follows me back? Marcus didn't answer that question immediately. Finally, he said, "Then we seal the tunnel permanently." At 11:45 p.m., I made my way to the maintenance corridor. The building felt different at night, quieter but also more alive somehow. My footsteps echoed off the concrete walls as I found the access panel that led to the service tunnel. The panel was smaller than I had expected, barely 2 feet square. I would have to crawl on my hands and knees the entire way. I clipped the radio to my belt, turned on my flashlight, and squeezed through the opening. The tunnel was cramped and dusty. Cables ran along both sides, and I could hear the building's electrical systems humming around me. But underneath that familiar sound, I could hear something else. The voices, growing clearer with each foot I crawled forward. "Almost there, Preston." Marcus's voice crackled through the radio. "Another 50 feet and you'll reach the chamber access." The voices weren't just calling my name anymore. They were having conversations with each other, discussing things I couldn't quite understand. But I caught fragments. Finally, someone who can hear us properly. "Been waiting so long. Show him the truth about this place." I reached the end of the tunnel and found myself staring at another access panel. This one was older, made of iron instead of modern steel. It was warm to the touch. "Preston, are you there?" Marcus's voice sounded distant and full of static. "I'm at the chamber entrance," I whispered into the radio. "Good. Document everything you see. And Preston, don't believe everything you hear." I pushed open the iron panel and climbed through into the chamber below. Part 2. The chamber was bigger than the photographs had suggested. My flashlight beam swept across stone walls covered in those shifting symbols. But what struck me first was the smell. It wasn't sulfur or decay like I had expected. It smelled like a hospital, clean, sterile, and somehow wrong. But there was something else in the air, a metallic taste that coated my tongue and made my teeth ache. The temperature was warm, much warmer than it should have been this far underground. Condensation dripped from the ceiling in a steady rhythm that seemed almost musical. The circular depression in the center of the room was about 6 feet across and perfectly round. The edges were smooth, polished to an almost mirror finish. When I shined my light into it, I couldn't see the bottom. But I could hear the voices coming from down there, clearer than ever. I walked to the edge and crouched down, aiming my flashlight beam straight down into the pit. The light seemed to be absorbed by the darkness below, creating no reflection, no indication of depth. It was like looking into empty space. "Preston." The voice came from directly below me. "We've been waiting for you." The voice was clear, distinct, and undeniably human. Not the distorted underwater sound I had heard upstairs. This was someone speaking normally, as if they were standing right next to me. I turned on the recorder and spoke into it. This is Preston Holt, maintenance worker for the Vatican. The time is 12:03 a.m. I'm in the chamber beneath the Acoustic Research Division. Don't record us, another voice said from the pit. Recording changes things. The voice sounded concerned, almost panicked. I wondered what they meant by recording changing things, but I decided to continue with my documentation. The chamber temperature is approximately 85 degrees Fahrenheit, significantly warmer than the surrounding areas. I said into the recorder. There's a strong metallic taste in the air and high humidity, despite being underground. I ignored the voice and continued my documentation. The chamber is approximately 20 feet square with a vaulted stone ceiling. The walls are covered in symbols that appear to move when viewed indirectly. There's a circular pit in the center. Depth unknown. Preston? Marcus's voice crackled through the radio. Are you getting clear audio? Very clear, I said. They're speaking English now. Tell him we speak every language, one of the voices said. Tell him we know languages that haven't been invented yet. I walked around the perimeter of the chamber, shining my light on the walls. The symbols weren't carved into the stone. They appeared to be burned in, as if someone had used intense heat to mark them permanently. The wall markings appear to be burned into the stone rather than carved, I said into the recorder. They consist of symbols I don't recognize, possibly predating known writing systems. They're not symbols, a voice from the pit said. They're names. I stopped walking and looked at the wall more carefully. The symbols did seem to be arranged in groups, like words or names. And as I watched, new ones appeared, burning themselves into the stone with a brief flash of heat. More markings are appearing as I watch, I said into the recorder. They seem to be forming spontaneously. Those are the new arrivals, the voice explained. Every time someone dies, their name gets added to the wall. I aimed my flashlight at a section where new symbols had just appeared. They were still glowing faintly with residual heat. Preston, what are you seeing? Marcus's voice was hard to hear over the static. The symbols on the walls are changing, I reported. New ones are appearing in real time. Don't tell him that, one of the voices said urgently. He'll shut down the project. What project? I asked. The voices went quiet for a moment. Then one of them laughed, a sound like grinding glass. You don't know, do you? It said. You have no idea why they really sent you down here. I looked around the chamber again, trying to see something I had missed. The walls seemed to pulse slightly, as if the stone itself was breathing. What are you talking about? This isn't a listening post, the voice said. It's a recruitment center. My blood went cold. Recruitment for what? The Vatican has been using this chamber for 70 years, another voice explained. They send people down here to listen to us, to document our words, but that's not the real purpose. Then what is? They're looking for someone who can hear us without losing their sanity. Someone who can serve as a permanent bridge between our world and yours. A third voice joined the conversation, older and more refined than the others. The church believes it's conducting research, but it's actually conducting interviews. Each person they send down here is a potential candidate for employment. Employment? I backed toward the tunnel entrance, but the iron panel had closed behind me. I pushed against it, but it wouldn't budge. Think about it, Preston, the first voice continued. 15 years you've worked in this building. 15 years of maintaining their systems, learning their secrets, gaining their trust. You know more about the Vatican's physical infrastructure than almost anyone. That doesn't mean anything, I said. But even as I spoke, I realized how valuable that knowledge would be to someone with malicious intent. It means everything, the refined voice said. We don't need theologians or scholars. We need someone who can move freely through the building. Someone who has access to areas most people never see. Someone who could plant listening devices, another voice added. Someone who could sabotage security systems. Someone who could poison water supplies, came a fourth voice, female this time. Someone who could start fires that would destroy specific documents while leaving others untouched, said yet another. I realized they were describing a detailed plan for infiltrating and potentially destroying the Vatican from within. And they wanted me to be their inside man. I backed toward the tunnel entrance, but the iron panel had closed behind me. I pushed against it, but it wouldn't budge. Preston? Marcus's voice was almost inaudible through the static. Preston, can you hear me? I grabbed the radio. Marcus, the exit is sealed. I'm trapped down here. But instead of Marcus's voice, I heard laughter coming through the radio. The same grinding glass sound I had heard from the pit. Marcus isn't monitoring you anymore, the voice said through the radio. We are. I threw the radio across the chamber and heard it shatter against the wall. But the voices didn't stop. Every person they've sent down here has become part of our collection, the voice from the pit explained. The 3-man team, the researchers before them, dozens of others over the decades. But they came back, I said. Marcus told me they came back changed. They came back as messengers, the voice said. Their job was to convince the next candidate to come down here willingly. I realized what had happened. The guard who had let me into the building, the one I had never seen before. He must have been one of the previous candidates. Marcus himself might not have been who he claimed to be. You're lying, I said, but I wasn't sure I believed it. Look at the wall behind you, the voice suggested. I turned and shined my flashlight on the wall near the tunnel entrance. Among the thousands of symbols burned into the stone, I could see letters that looked almost like English. Preston. My name was already there. That appeared the moment you entered the chamber, the voice said, just like all the others. I stared at the glowing letters, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. This doesn't make sense. I'm not dead. Death isn't required, the voice explained. Just commitment. Once your name appears on the wall, you become part of our collection, part of our network. Network? The Vatican believes they're studying hell, the voice said, but hell is studying them right back. Every person they send down here becomes our agent in their world. We learn their secrets, their plans, their weaknesses. I dropped the recorder and started looking for another way out. The chamber had to connect to something else. Some other tunnel or passage. There's no other exit, the voice said, reading my thoughts. The only way out is through the pit. I looked down into the circular depression. My flashlight beam still couldn't reach the bottom. What's down there? Come and see. I sat down on the stone floor and tried to think logically. The Vatican had been using this chamber for decades, sending people down to listen to these voices. Some came back changed. Others didn't come back at all. But there had to be a purpose beyond simple recruitment. What does the Vatican want with you? I asked. Information, the voice said. They want to know about the afterlife, about divine judgment, about the fate of souls, and we give them what they want to hear. You lie to them? We tell them partial truths, enough to keep them interested, not enough to give them real power. I stood up and walked to the edge of the pit. And what do you get in return? Influence. Every person we recruit gives us a little more reach into your world. Eventually, we'll have enough agents in place to make real changes. What kind of changes? The voice laughed again. The kind that would make hell seem like paradise. I realized I was dealing with something far beyond a simple haunting. This was an organized effort, a long-term plan that had been in motion for decades, and I had walked right into it. But I wasn't helpless. I still had my tools, my knowledge of the building's systems, and I had one advantage the previous candidates probably didn't have. I knew this was a trap. I opened my tool bag and pulled out a small demolition charge I used for breaking through concrete walls. It wasn't much, but it might be enough to collapse the tunnel and prevent anyone else from coming down here. That won't work, the voice said. The tunnel is protected. Protected how? The same way this chamber is protected. The Vatican may think they built this place, but we helped with the construction. Every stone, every brick, every piece of mortar contains elements that make it nearly indestructible. I looked at the demolition charge in my hand. It was small, designed for precision work rather than major destruction. But maybe precision was what I needed. Preston, another voice called from the pit. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Join us willingly, and we'll make sure your transition is comfortable. Transition to what? To your new role as our agent in the Vatican. You'll return to your normal job, your normal life. But you'll also be working for us, gathering information, influencing decisions. I walked around the pit, studying its construction. The stone was ancient, much older than the rest of the chamber. And unlike the walls, it didn't have any symbols burned into it. This pit isn't part of the original Roman temple, is it? I asked. The voices went quiet. I aimed my flashlight at the edge of the pit and saw something interesting. The stone around the rim showed tool marks, chisel marks, from when it had been carved. But the marks were relatively recent, maybe a few hundred years old. The Vatican built this pit, I said. They created the connection to wherever you are. That's not important, one of the voices said quickly. But it was important. If the Vatican had built the connection, then they could also destroy it. I just needed to figure out how. I knelt down and examined the stone more carefully. The pit wasn't carved from a single piece of rock. It was made from several curved sections fitted together, and I could see hairline cracks where the sections joined. As a maintenance worker, I had spent countless hours studying structural problems. These cracks showed all the signs of thermal expansion damage, the kind that happened when stone was repeatedly heated and cooled over long periods. The voices coming from below generated heat, and that heat was slowly destroying the pit's structural integrity. The pit is breaking apart, I said. That's why the seal failed 6 months ago. The structure is deteriorating. I ran my fingers along one of the larger cracks and felt warmth radiating from inside. The crack was wider than it appeared, probably extending deep into the stone. If I could apply pressure at the right point, the entire section might collapse. Preston, you need to stop this line of thinking, the voice said urgently. I opened my tool bag and pulled out more than just the demolition charge. I had a small hydraulic jack, the kind used for lifting heavy pipes into position. If I could wedge it into the largest crack and apply pressure, it might be enough to start a chain reaction. This is insane, I muttered to myself as I positioned the jack. I'm about to try to collapse hell. You don't understand what you're doing, the female voice said. This connection has been carefully maintained for centuries. If you destroy it carelessly, the backlash could kill you. What kind of backlash? The energy that flows through this pit doesn't just carry voices, the refined voice explained. It carries heat, pressure, spiritual force. If you cut it off suddenly, all of that energy has to go somewhere. I hesitated with my hand on the jack's handle. Where would it go? Into you, the voice said simply. You're the only living thing in the chamber. You would absorb all of it at once. I thought about that for a moment. If the voices were telling the truth, destroying the pit would be suicide. But if they were lying, hesitation would mean becoming their agent forever. There's another option, I said, reaching for the demolition charge instead. Instead of trying to collapse the whole structure at once, I could create a controlled failure. I had done similar work when removing old pipes from walls. Instead of trying to extract them all at once, you created small breaks in sequence, allowing pressure to equalize gradually. I set the demolition charge at a specific point where 2 crack lines intersected. The explosion would widen both cracks simultaneously, but not enough to cause immediate collapse. The structure would fail slowly, giving any built-up energy time to dissipate. That might actually work, the female voice said grudgingly. But you'll still be trapped down here while it happens. Maybe, I said, but at least I'll stop you from recruiting anyone else. I activated the charge's timer and ran toward the tunnel entrance. The iron panel was still sealed, but I put my shoulder against it and pushed with everything I had. Behind me, the voices were screaming now, no longer trying to sound helpful or persuasive. They were revealing their true nature, desperate, angry, and terrified of losing their connection to the surface world. The demolition charge exploded with a sharp crack that echoed through the chamber. I heard stones falling into the pit, and the voices suddenly cut off. The iron panel gave way, and I tumbled through into the service tunnel. Behind me, I could hear the chamber collapsing as the pit's structure failed completely. I crawled through the tunnel as fast as I could, following the cable runs back to the maintenance corridor. The building's electrical systems were humming normally, and I couldn't hear any voices except my own breathing. When I reached the access panel and climbed out into the corridor, I found Marcus waiting for me. The real Marcus this time. I could tell because he looked genuinely surprised to see me. "Preston, what are you doing down here? It's 3 a.m. I looked at him carefully, studying his face for any sign of deception. "You don't remember our conversation yesterday?" "What conversation?" "I've never seen you before." I realized what had happened. The Marcus I had met in the acoustic research division hadn't been the real Dr. Finley at all. He had been one of the Voices agents, probably one of the previous candidates who had been recruited years ago. "Where's the acoustic research division?" I asked. "There's no such thing," Marcus said. "I work in historical archives, not acoustic research." I described the room where I had met the fake Marcus, but the real Marcus shook his head. "That sounds like one of the old storage rooms," he said. "They've been empty for years." I led him to sub-level 3 and found section 12. The door was there, but when we opened it, the room was completely empty. No desk, no filing cabinets, no acoustic equipment, just dust and cobwebs. "Preston, are you feeling all right?" Marcus asked. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Something like that," I said. I never told anyone the full story of what happened in that chamber. The official report stated that I had discovered a structural weakness in the sub-level 3 foundations and had used a controlled demolition to prevent a collapse that could have damaged the upper floors. The Vatican gave me a commendation and a raise. They also sealed off access to sub-level 3 permanently, citing safety concerns. But I knew the real reason they sealed it off. 3 days after the incident, Janet came to me with a worried expression. "Preston, we've had some strange reports from the archives," she said. "Documents going missing, files being moved around, and some of the staff are complaining about hearing voices in the walls." "What kind of voices?" "Whispers. Conversations in languages they don't recognize. Nothing clear enough to make out words, but loud enough to be disturbing." I realized that destroying the pit hadn't eliminated the connection entirely. It had just weakened it. The voices were still trying to reach the surface, but now they had to work harder to be heard. "Have you noticed any patterns?" I asked. "Specific times when the voices are stronger?" Janet nodded. "Midnight to 3 a.m., just like you reported in your maintenance log, but also during certain religious ceremonies, high masses especially." That made sense. The connection was probably strengthened by spiritual energy, which would be most concentrated during important religious events. "I've been thinking," Janet continued. "Maybe we should recommend a full inspection of all the sublevels. Make sure there aren't any other structural problems." "No," I said quickly. "Absolutely not. The fewer people who go down there, the better." She looked at me strangely. "Preston, you've been different since that night. More serious, more cautious. What really happened down there?" I couldn't tell her the truth, but I could give her enough information to keep her safe. "Janet, if anyone ever asks you to send maintenance workers to sub-level 3 again, refuse. No matter who asks, no matter what reason they give. That area is dangerous in ways that have nothing to do with structural integrity." She studied my face for a long moment. Are we talking about asbestos? Radiation? We're talking about something that would make those problems seem trivial, I said. Just trust me on this. Over the following months, I made it my business to monitor the sealed areas. I installed unauthorized security cameras in the maintenance corridors that led to sub-level 3. I rigged motion detectors that would alert me if anyone tried to access the forbidden areas. Most importantly, I started keeping detailed records of everyone who worked in the building. If the Vatican tried to recruit more agents for their acoustic research, I would know about it. The voices never completely disappeared, but they grew weaker over time. Sometimes I could hear them late at night, calling my name from behind the sealed doors. They sounded frustrated, angry at being cut off from their recruitment pipeline. But sometimes, late at night when I'm working alone in the building, I can still hear faint voices coming from below. They're weaker now, distant and frustrated, but they're still there, still trying to find a way back to the surface. And sometimes I wonder if I actually succeeded in stopping them, or if I just made them more careful about their approach. I keep a demolition charge in my tool bag at all times now, just in case they find another way through. The room in the Vatican, where you can hear what hell sounds like, is gone now, buried under tons of collapsed stone. But hell is patient, and hell is clever, and I'm the only one who knows they're still down there waiting for their next opportunity. I'll be ready for them.